Wonderful. Well, that was an incredibly powerful film and a real expression of Jewish values. I want to welcome our very esteemed panelists and thank you for joining us this evening. You can read in more depth about each of our guests tonight in your program, but I do want to briefly introduce them. Alexandra Lehman leads the Reproductive Health Rights and Justice Policy portfolio at the National Council of Jewish Women. JCRC is proud to partner with NCJW, which is the leading Jewish advocacy organization working to protect and advance reproductive rights and access to health care for all. I'm pleased to welcome Delegate Charneil Herring, who serves as Majority Leader in the Virginia House of Delegates. We're very honored to have you tonight. Leader Herring founded the Virginia Legislative Reproductive Health Caucus, and she's championed several pieces of legislation to protect women's health freedom. And last but most certainly not least, our own Northern Virginian, Allie Tombros-Corman, is the founder and executive director of the Red Tent Fund, a national nonprofit rooted in Jewish values and teachings that funds abortions across the country for anyone who needs care, with no restrictions on religion, identity, income, or other factors. And I am very proud to serve on the National Leadership Advisory Board for the Red Tent Fund. Thank you again all for being here with us tonight. I want to dive right into our discussion. Alex, can you update us on where the Indiana case is right now? Because that was the most recent information there was from 2022, and I know it's been in the news recently.
Yes. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to the JCRC for having us, and to be among these fellow panelists is truly an honor, and to all of you for being here on this probably almost rainy Thursday evening. We really appreciate it. And what I love about this film is that it really encapsulates the power of approaching access to abortion from this frame of religious freedom. And that we as Jews are able to understand that religious freedom doesn't just apply to one narrow faith tradition, right? It belongs to all of us. And that our First Amendment guarantees that we can be free from the imposition of one theological view, right, in our laws, and we can freely exercise what our faith compels us to do. And in that free exercise vein, I think we see this RFRA challenge brought. So the case was filed in 2022. My organization, National Council of Jewish Women, filed an amicus brief alongside almost, I believe it was over 20 interfaith partners. And after years of sort of procedural back and forth, various stages of litigation, the most recent update we got was in the March of this past year, so about 2 months ago, where a permanent injunction was granted to the plaintiffs. And what's really critical is that this was a class action suit. So the plaintiffs were the Hoosier Jews for Choice, to whom we were introduced in this film, as well as some anonymous plaintiffs, including Jewish women, who really cogently argued the ways in which this abortion ban infringed upon their free religious exercise. But what's amazing about this ruling is that anyone in the state, right, regardless of what the leader of their faith tradition might say, if they feel so compelled by their faith to access abortion care, that according to the law right now, they are able to receive that exemption. What that might look like in practice is a very different question, right? I believe there are only 2 people who are providing abortion care right now in the state of Indiana as a result of that ban. So what does it look like for insurance coverage? What does it look like to access through these challenging sort of legal pathways that religious exemption? So we're continuing to explore that, but what we've learned in the past few weeks is that this case is now, it was immediately appealed by the state's Attorney General. It's being fast-tracked to the state Supreme Court. So oral arguments are set for September. Briefs are due in the next month. So my organization, alongside partners, plans to file another amicus brief where we will directly invoke theological teachings to substantiate the authenticity, the sincerity of these religious beliefs, because we know this to be true, and this movement is growing. While this litigation strategy specifically is relatively novel, right? We're really seeing it start to develop in the past few decades, but then in this specific iteration in the post-Dobbs era, where we need new and fresh and innovative legal strategies to combat these bans. My organization has been around for 130 years, And throughout that history, we've been advocating for abortion access, not in spite of, but because of our faith that teaches us that health and justice and dignity is so integral, that in fact life doesn't begin at conception, as we learned in the film. And that religious pluralism is so core to our democracy flourishing, but to all of us and our families and our communities being able to freely live. And that's why it's so exciting to see litigation like this in Indiana, to see this happening in various states, and now in Virginia, right, the last bastion of abortion access in the South. We are on the precipice of something really exciting, and I look forward to learning more about that.
Thank you. So, Leader Herring, that's a great segue. Where do things stand in Virginia, and in terms of the constitutional amendment? And can you also talk a little bit about what Alex just discussed, the critical role that Virginia plays in the South, so people understand that?
Right, and thank you for that question, and thank you for your amazing work. And I'm just grateful to be here. It has been a long road in Virginia, and I'm just going to take you all back. This all started with TRAP regulations that it was a surprise to all of us. A bill was amended having to do with nursing home facilities. And it started, sort of our fight for freedom started there. Then we had the forced ultrasound bill that we fought against for a long time. And I'm just going to point to 2020 when she's in our audience, Speaker Eileen Fillicorn, the speaker, and with her leadership, and I was honored to carry the bill for the Reproductive Health Protection Act, which made Virginia the only state in the South that provides access to abortion within the limits of the law. And we also got rid of a lot of unnecessary things that restricted access, like non-evidence-based informed consent laws, waiting periods, and things that were not evidence-based and actually was harmful for patients according to doctors. So we, in this process for constitutional amendments in Virginia, we have to pass it twice in the legislature with no changes with the intervening election. So we have done that. We passed it last year in the late fall, and then we had our intervening election and we passed it again. So it is headed to voters in November. It will make Virginia, and I just want to say that this constitutional amendment is broad. It's in the sense that it protects the entire spectrum of reproductive health care. So protecting birth control access, protecting postpartum care, of course, abortion care, protects fertility treatments. So it's a full spectrum, and that's where we are. There's going to be a lot of work, though, to make sure that voters understand what the constitutional amendment is, and action on the ground. So, making sure we are talking to voters.
It has been a journey.
Yes.
I remember when I first joined JCRC, and our Virginia director at the time, Darcy Hirsch, who is now at National Council of Jewish Women, she and I were working on those TRAP bills and on the ultrasound bills. And so it's been a real odyssey.
It certainly has. And I just, to be honest, there were people on my side of the aisle that didn't want to embrace this freedom that we kept talking about and saying, well, no, no, no. But, when we don't embrace freedom, religious freedom, freedom to have dominion over your own body, you see tragic consequences. And we saw in other states with restrictions on abortions, politicians who don't know science, quite frankly, making restrictions, and then what doctors are scared to provide care. Women have miscarriages and they're not able to discharge the miscarriage without the use of abortifacient, and so sepsis sets in. And we have seen, and it's been reported, either women die, become very sick, or become infertile. So this has been a long fight and a long struggle, but unfortunately we're seeing the consequences of restrictions in other states and what could possibly happen in Virginia if we don't continue to fight and make sure that this constitutional amendment is passed.
Allie, how does your work at the Red Tent Fund fit into this? We were just, you and I, sharing an article that talked about how Virginia has become a travel point for people across the South. How does your work at the Red Tent Fund fit into that?
Great question. Thank you so much for having me. And it's really lovely to be in the room with JCRC anytime I can be, because JCRC is so much a part of kind of the origin story of how Red Tent came to be. The very quick version is, as a public health professional, I work in sectional reproductive health and was working at a local abortion fund when October 7th happened. And the fallout and the lack of welcoming for Jewish identity in certain progressive spaces after October 7th was very front and center in the work in the organization that I was doing. And long before I knew Gila and Ron, I had champions in my corner who were helping to stand up and say, it is not okay to hold Jewish people to a different standard, to make them choose between their support for reproductive health and rights and abortion access and their Jewish identity. So the Red Tent Fund was born from that experience and is really a way for us to live our Jewish values the way that we see in the film, the way that Alex was talking about, a way for people to not feel like they have to choose between their identity, their religious identity, and their support for reproductive health. We provide abortions for anyone, well, we provide funding, excuse me, for abortions for anyone who needs it, regardless of their personal identity, their politics, their religion, because to me, that is an incredibly Jewish thing, to take care of not just people who look like us or are from our immediate community, but to look larger, broader at the world around us and try to make it better. So that's what we are doing. We're raising money predominantly from the Jewish community, but not exclusively, and then turning around and getting that money out the door to independent abortion clinics around the country so that patients can access the funding they so desperately need in order to access abortion care.
We're going to open it up to questions, but before we do, I just want to ask each of you if you could briefly talk about what average folk like us can do to be a part of protecting these freedoms and advancing this cause. So we'll start with Leader Hebron.
Okay. There is a group called the Virginia Coalition for Reproductive Freedom. They are a coalition of different groups coming together. There's actually this Saturday in Richmond at the Bell Tower at the Capitol, there's going to be a rally. That's the beginning of sort of the launch of our on-the-ground effort. So it is talking to friends, it's talking to neighbors, is helping make phone calls or doing postcards and just talking to individuals about this amendment that is on the ballot, and so that people are starting to educate themselves and know that and ready to vote to support it. Yes, it polls well, but polls are polls. Doing the work and making sure people turn out to vote is very important, and we just can't allow people to get discouraged. Everyone needs them. Men and women, this act protects everybody's reproductive freedom, so it's important that we do so, and yeah, that would be helpful.
Wonderful. We'll be sharing this information from our office. Alex?
I appreciate this question because this is really an all-hands-on-deck moment, and there's a role for everyone. So NCJW is a part of that coalition, but we also have launched a Virginia-based interfaith coalition for reproductive health rights and justice, and I do want to shout out our state policy advocate, Joni Hun, who's in the audience, and they are convening an interfaith prayer breakfast on Saturday at 10 a.m. in Richmond before this campaign kicks off. So please, if you have any questions, I'm sure she'd be happy to help. We're really excited about that. I also wanted to call attention to my colleague Sarah Flores Shannon in the audience, who runs the Faithful Majority for Reproductive Freedom Coalition, which is another interfaith coalition that is working to reclaim the narrative around religious and reproductive freedom. And that's where all of us have a role to play in how we talk about abortion, how we engage our communities, whether that's at the courthouse, whether that's at the dinner table. You may have seen headlines popping up actually just hours before we came here that the Supreme Court granted a stay on mifepristone access. So happy to get into sort of the details of that case. It gets a little bit wonky, but ultimately this is a short-term win, and NCJW filed a brief with over 50 interfaith partners to the Supreme Court on this case. So again, big, small, in an individual capacity, in an organizational capacity, we're at the real precipice of change right now. And that's very exciting. And to know that when we broaden the tent, that there are more people who come, to know that we're doing this in community and are doing it with joy is really affirming and really exciting. So I hope you are able to share in that joy.
Allie?
Absolutely. I am so grateful that you are doing the things that you are doing to make these policy changes happen. The NCJW is there from an advocacy perspective. I think I've lived in Virginia for more than a dozen years now, and the idea that we are at this moment, we are so close to being able to enshrining this in our constitutional amendments is so unbelievably exciting to me. And so while these amazing folks are out and pushing for those policy changes, which we so desperately need, I would invite all of you to see yourselves as part of the work that is happening in the interim. While we all know the work of government and policy is slow, and in the meantime, people need abortions. And so we need we need the Jewish community to stand up and support abortion access for all. You can do that through the Red Tent Fund. You can do that through other abortion access organizations. Personally, we at the Red Tent Fund, what we really need is for you to tell 5 people that we exist. I think our word of mouth is one of our greatest strengths as a community, our ability to share information and support each other's experiences. And so telling 5 people about the Red Tent Fund, whether because they may be in a position to support it or because they may someday be in a position today, tomorrow, or down the road where they need our funding, this only serves to help more people, to let them know that we exist. And lastly, but certainly not least, I would ask that to the extent that you can and that you feel comfortable, that you show up in as many spaces as you can, proudly, unapologetically Jewish, proudly, unapologetically pro-abortion. To Alex's point about, this takes time, this takes conversation, this takes change change of heart for some people to come around to this issue. When people see one of us stepping into a space and saying, we are proudly wearing this mantle of we are Jewish and pro-abortion, I think it really helps create an opportunity for conversation that we desperately need.
Thank you. Thank all of you. Well, we're going to open it up to some Q&A. We do need somebody who needs a mic.
This is a question about the film itself. What was the purpose of why it was made, and who is the intended audience?
I think we might have to get back to you on that one.
Oh, I think they just need the mic.
Can you hear me? Okay, sorry about that. I just had to get the microphone back. I'm not familiar with the filmmaker, but the filmmaker has worked, Paula Eiseld has worked with NCJW, and I think the audience for the film is the same as the audience for any documentary. It's been shown at film festivals around the country. It's won many awards, and I think the purpose is to shed light on an angle for protecting these rights that people may not be familiar with. Okay.
Yes. Regardless of one's opinion on, I'd say, the merits of the film itself, I think it's a testament to the power of storytelling. And I think, as Ali mentioned, showing up Jewishly in these spaces matters. If you like the T-shirt you saw, shamelessly, that said Jews for Abortion Access, you can find that on the NCJW website. But I would say another way we can tell the story is through using our platforms. So every year, NCJW does a Repro Shabbat, which is when we read the portion in the Torah that undergirds our Jewish belief in abortion access. And we have thousands of clergy across the country who from the Bima are speaking to their congregations about why it is a Jewish value to support reproductive freedom, about how we can take action, about how we can step up. So I think hearing unconventional voices perhaps on this conversation, that can really start to shift the needle. So whether it's through film at a film festival to a lay audience, whether it's to a group that's gathered for Shabbat, I think there are ways that you can serve now as an advocate, knowing what we know and what we've talked about today.
And I would just add, if I can, that I think for so long, you know, when they speak to this in the film, that for so long when you talked about this intersectionality of faith and reproductive health, or faith and abortion, there was almost just an assumption that we were talking about the Christian right and this idea that there was no support for abortion. And so for groups like NCJW to have worked for so many years to start to change that narrative and to start to introduce these conversations, both in terms of spirituality and our spiritual right to exercise our religious freedoms, but also the laws and teachings that back up and affirm the right to those beliefs, I just think has opened up the door to an entirely new conversation we couldn't have, I don't think, imagined 15 or 20 years ago.
Can I say, as a Christian, I'm grateful because I feel I cannot speak to the faith. So having that story told is meaningful for those who are not Jewish to understand, because as a Christian, I wouldn't feel comfortable talking about someone's faith that's not mine. And that, you would be surprised in the legislature, which is, there are some who actually say, you know what, I did not know that. I had no idea. And they start to rethink their position. So I'm grateful when people tell their stories, and especially their faith, where they're coming from and their beliefs. It makes a difference.
Yeah, and I think I've watched this film several times, and each time that the woman from Indiana said that they're not going to have a second child, that is so powerful and heartbreaking and understandable. Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank you all so much. We will be sharing information about concrete action that you all can take to be a part of this work, and invite you to chat with our speakers after the close of the program. Thank you so much.